Whales and cameras. I'm going to tell some stories today, but I'll tell you about a story I heard 22 years ago. It was on an expedition cruise ship in Alaska, and I was the National Geographic whale guy on board, and the naturalist, Linda Richardson, came up to me and told me a story about a friendly dolphin in southeast Alaska. It was a dolphin that was interested in people, coming up to people, so she went to see it. And when she went to see it, she saw that it looked interested, so she took her clothes off and jumped in the water, and it swam with her. I hear lots of interesting stories being the whale guy for National Geographic, and I think she could see I was a little skeptical about what she was talking about, but she was prepared. She had someone with her with a camera, and she brought out the black and white prints. And there she was, stripped down to her skivvies in 45-degree water in Haines, Alaska, swimming with the Pacific whiteside dolphin. Two things were clear. One, it was a true story. And second, this woman was absolutely crazy. In all the best ways. We've been together ever since.
Hi, I'm Flip Nicklin, and for the last 43 years, my career has centered around swimming with whales, taking their pictures, and telling their stories. We are now well past the time when we just saw whales in museums. We head out and meet them in their world, in Hawaii, in Alaska, and around the world with whale watching. As a kid in the 50s, having whale watching being looking at puffs of smoke in the distance off the coast of San Diego, I never dreamed that whale watching would become so big and that people would be able to see them face to face. And video photography and stills have become a big part of telling their story. Whales are just a great subject for photography. Whether it's with your phone telling the story of your day of whale watching, whether it's using whales as a subject for art, these magnificent giant animals and the things that they do, or in my case, trying to tell the story as an editorial photographer, mostly for National Geographic. The story has changed so much over time, but it didn't start with pictures like these. And I had no plan to do this for a career. It was all my father's fault.
We didn't have very fancy cameras when I was growing up, but a friend of my father's, a business acquaintance, was Connie Limbaugh, the first diving officer at Scripps Institute. And Connie was a pioneer diver and a pioneer marine scientist. And he died in a cave diving accident in France in 1960. And his widow, Nan, gave my father two cameras, a Rolling Marine, 2¼ underwater camera with a flat port and a flash attachment where you shoot flash bulbs, flat port, and a 16mm Bell and Howell camera with a Samson Hall housing. And my father started trying to learn how to be a photographer.
I think it was a pretty sure thing that I was going to be a diver. My mother's father and uncle did underwater construction work with hard hat gear, building things like piers along the California coast. And in the 60s, my mom was even a cover girl on Skin Diver magazine. My father, Chuck, was a sport diver and champion spearfisherman. And in 1959, opened the Diving Locker, the second dive shop in San Diego. And my brother Terry and I grew up in a diving world that was largely about spearfishing and spearfishing contests. And then in January of 1963, my father rode a whale. My dad was off of La Jolla diving with friends, and they saw a whale in the distance. We saw whales all the time. Gray whales went close to the coast, going north and south on their migration. But this wasn't a gray whale, it was a Brutus whale, and it wasn't going anywhere because it was caught up into the anchor line of a gill net. My father got in the water with a camera and one of his buddies with the spear guns to swim up and photograph and film the whale. This was before whales were gentle giants. It was a big, powerful animal, and they weren't sure what was going to happen. It was really a big adventure and thought to be fairly dangerous at the time. And after they had photographed the whale and filmed the whale was very calm, and my father swam up and actually got on the whale's back and had his picture taken by his friend Bill DeCourt. They took their pictures to Rolla Williams, a sports editor at the San Diego Union, and he was someone you'd take a picture of a big fish or a big lobster to. It was good advertising for the dive shop, but the pictures were really popular. They ran in the San Diego Union and across the country. And it probably would have stopped right there, except they had movies. They had 16mm movies, which was a big deal at the time. And there was a young man with a variety show after the late news in San Diego, a very young Regis Philbin, who had my dad on to show his film, to show the pictures of whales underwater on film. After the show, they took that film, they sent it to New York and to a production company called Goodson Todman Productions. And one of their shows was To Tell the Truth. 3 people came on telling a wild story. One of them was telling the truth. My father went to New York. He was the guy on To Tell the Truth, telling the real story. And in the audience, in the TV audience, was Bates Littlehales. He was the underwater guy for National Geographic in the 50s and 60s. He looked up my father. He'd been thinking about doing whales underwater, and my father was a whale expert. He'd seen one. Seeing that first whale led to all kinds of things for my father. He became the go-to second guy on whale projects. One of the first documentaries on humpback whales, Gentle Giants of the Pacific. He started working for National Geographic on a number of projects, but especially the first big humpback whale story in 1979. This was the story with the small record, Songs of the Humpback Whale, to sort of introduce singing humpback whales to the world. And he came to Hawaii on an IMAX film, Nomads of the Deep, the first underwater IMAX film.
I tried to find a picture of my first underwater camera, but it was sold, like even on eBay, I couldn't find a picture. But this is the camera I use now. It's a Nikon D850. They got a big dome. It's a CNC housing. It works all the time. And I think this year I'm going to use a 20 on it, and it's, boy, it's sure a lot better. It shoots about the equivalent of 150 plus rolls of 35mm film without opening up the back and worrying about dripping into it when you're changing film.
It was really Bates Littlehales that got me interested in photography and introduced me to the world of National Geographic and National Geographic assignment photography. When I was going out with Bates and my dad, usually driving small boats and pulling anchors, once in a while he'd let me borrow a camera and take a picture. And at the end, I got to, I was teaching diving, scuba diving, to geographic photographers and writers in San Diego. So I was teaching scuba diving and running a dive shop in San Diego when one of my students, Jonathan Blair, invited me to come for 3 months to the Northwest Hawaiian chain to be an assistant on a story for National Geographic. I got 2 pictures published in the magazine from that story, and I never came back to the diving locker. I was going to try and make a living with a camera. I took all kinds of oddball jobs, photographing science in the oil industry, got a few pictures published in National Geographic, but it was about 3 years before things started to really make sense for me. The first proposal I sent in that was accepted by National Geographic was to do sharks and shark research. And then I met Dr. Jim Darling and a whale named Frank. The first whale picture I shot that became popular was of my father with a humpback whale as we were shooting the IMAX film Nomads of the Deep in 1979 off of Lahaina. Most of the whales we were filming were curious whales, whales that came up to us, whales we called friendlies. And then, on March 10th, 1979, we were called over by Dr. Jim Darling to photograph Frank.
We drifted over at Slick and looked down and saw something. And sure enough, it was a whale. And at that point, we realized that, oh my, I mean, these singers are diving as if they're going to go down to the bottom, but they get, 10, 30, 40 feet below the surface and just stop. And with the visibility there, being double that, you could, especially if it was a lighter colored singer or it had white on the flippers, you could see it from the boat. You guys were in the neighborhood and were able to come over and film it. And that just changed everything. All of a sudden, we weren't just recording songs and trying to understand what they were doing. When they were singing, we could actually locate and watch and film and study the individual that was doing the singing and realize that we could actually learn something here. And that led to me changing my PhD from studying gray whales to humpback whales, and just a whole bunch of other things happened. Was it, both sexes which sung, males and females, or was it just males? And realization that we could go out and actually find these animals on a daily basis. And then, with your abilities to get down there and take photographs of them, the objective in 1980 was simply to find as many singers as we could find and take as many photographs as we could of their underside and determine whether they were males or females. Working that closely with the animals, though, led to all kinds of other encounters and interactions with whales, doing, behavior, social behavior patterns, and so on. And all of a sudden, there were a million questions to answer, and we knew that we could answer them. I had some of your photographs, and I showed them at this meeting, and there were people there who simply could not believe it, that you could both locate and get close to and photograph whales at sea, like we did. They really couldn't grasp. I mean, I had people come up afterward and say, how did you do that? And these were, old-time sort of biologists who, we were only a few years, ahead of them, because a few years back, we would have probably asked the same question. We were fortunate enough to be in Maui with such good conditions, and it probably allowed us a bit of a head start on some of this stuff. No one realized that these whales were actually competing with each other or fighting with each other. We didn't really know what they were doing. And I remember one day, it was Greg Silver. We were out in the boat, and we were with a group, and he was watching what was going underwater by hanging over the boat with a mask on. He came up, and he was just astounded that he'd just seen one whale hit another one. And there was this sort of aggressive, competitive type behavior going on. It was a complete revelation at the time. I mean, the whole sort of nature of what was going on out there, and in fact, the nature of whales changed with just, one really good observation, which sort of opened the doors to sort of us realizing what we've been watching for a long time. After the first few years of taking pictures, sort of as an aside to recording songs, I don't know, we had a few hundred whales. And I had actually tried to give it away, the cataloging. Nobody really seemed to want it, so I carried on, and it became the basis of my PhD. One of the questions which arose was we kept on taking pictures and counting the individuals. And we found that the number of whales we actually photographed was larger than some of the estimates for the number of whales in Hawaii overall. And of course, bit of a contradiction there because we certainly weren't identifying all the animals. We came up with a population estimate of, well, somewhere around 1,000 whales, which was made a lot more sense at that time than the couple hundred which people were talking about.
When I came to Hawaii in 1979 on the IMAX film, and my dad had just done the natural history documentary, Gentle Giants of the Pacific, that focused on how nice whales were and they wanted to be friendly and they liked people. And then I'm out with Jim and he's going, get the pictures of the bloody head knobs. They're beating the heck out of each other out here. And you go, there's a big move between Save the Whales and the popular support and love of whales and the mystery of the song and what science was seeing. And not that the first is wrong. They are curious. They're wonderful. They're beautiful. And they do all kinds of interesting stuff. And I think basically I saw my career was going to be taking that interest of whales, that love of whales, and moving it towards some of the other interesting things that science is finding out that's usually years ahead of the popular narrative and telling those stories.
The idea is that researchers were excited about seeing and studying new things about whales, new behavior about whales, is what got me excited about whale photography. And the timing was great. Researchers were really just starting to work with wild whales and learn how to study them, and I was trying to figure out how to make that a story with pictures. And about this time, the Nikona's 15mm lens came out. A small camera with a wide lens which allowed me to free dive and get closer to whales and made a giant difference in the pictures I could take. At that point I was shooting Kodachrome, and we could take the film, and if we got it in by 3 o'clock to a photo shop across from a Space Invader parlor in downtown Lahaina, we'd get it back at 8 o'clock the next morning, and I'd be there with the scientific crew standing on the street in downtown Lahaina holding up 35mm slides just to see if we got anything. Film exposure was so critical on Kodachrome that we would bracket our exposure, so even if you did everything right, only about 1/3 of the pictures came out properly exposed. I came back to Maui in 1980 as part of the scientific crew, mostly diving under singing humpback whales and shooting pictures of their bellies. And at the end of that season, National Geographic, actually Mary Smith, asked me to come back to the office in Washington and talk about a whale story. And this led me to going back in 1981, having my own place to live, driving a rental car, having my expenses covered, and being paid. And in 1982, in April, the article on a new light on the singing whales came out in National Geographic, and I didn't know it, but I was on my way to being the whale guy for National Geographic.
I wish anybody could be as excited as I was to get my byline in the first National Geographic story and all the things that came with it back in 1982, including secondary sales of pictures, which was a big, big deal at the time. And there were Italian rights and Spanish rights and all these secondary rights. But the most interesting secondary sale I probably ever made was after that 1982 story. And I got a call from J. Walter Thompson, an advertising company in New York City. And they said, we've seen your story, we love your work, especially this picture of the mother and calf humpback whale. We'd like to buy it. We have a client that wants that picture. He just doesn't want any whales in it. I thought he was kidding, but he wasn't. And they were ready to send me back to Hawaii to go out there and shoot the same blue water streaks without the whale in it when I found one picture in the yellow boxes in the throwaways where I'd missed the whale, and that was good enough. That picture sold for a month's assignment pay for National Geographic, and my world had changed dramatically.
I was going to cover research stories on whales and dolphins for the magazine for the next 27 years. It was a wonderful, wonderful job. But in my world, in the world of whale research, I wasn't the whale guy. I was doing stories about the the whale guys, the men and women who did research on whales and dolphins and spent years for my weeks in looking and living with the animals and trying to know them better. And it was a great group to work with. Inspirational people doing what jobs that were thought to be impossible back in the 70s, learning about the lives of wild whales and dolphins. Especially memorable was work done with Dr. Ken Norris after he retired from UC Santa Cruz. We did stories on dolphins and a story on belugas in the high Arctic. And they were interesting people to work with. So I was a free-diving photographer from San Diego and had done my first big story on whales in Hawaii. The water's nice and warm. It's a beautiful place to work. So the next assignment I got from National Geographic was to do krill in very cold water. Most of the animals we were working with were very small, shrimp-like critters, and most of the work was done in southern Chile or Antarctica. So I was learning a lot. But luckily, part of the krill story was going to be in killer whale country in Vancouver Island, and it was going to be a way to get a first look and a chance to maybe shoot a killer whale story for the magazine. This led to my second whale story, The Whales Called Killer, working with Mike Bigg and John Ford, and it was going to lead to my next whale story. I just didn't know it. Narwhal, unicorn of the Arctic seas, and getting me, a kid from the beaches of San Diego, an introduction to a whole different world. The assignment began to northern Baffin Island with a group from the Vancouver Aquarium. We went out of Pond Inlet out to the flow edge where the ice stops and the ocean begins. This group only had a couple of days out there and then had to go back, but my guide said that was fine. I could stay there, hope to get pictures. He'd go drop them off and come right back that day. Well, he was gone for 3 days, and I was in a place that was really different than San Diego, trying to figure things out. 24-hour sun, doing everything wrong at the wrong times, worrying about polar bears a lot and sleeping with that big shotgun in the background. I woke up and heard my tent moving around, and all of a sudden the zipper got to be undone, and a head poked in. It was Sigluk Akiaguk, an Inuit from Grise Fjord, and he looked in and said, "You have to leave." I said, no, I'm okay. I'm with National Geographic. I have all the right permits. And he said, "No, where you are is not going to be here tomorrow. You have to leave." And I did. With his help, we moved about 12 miles away onto solid ground, and after I woke up there, looked out, and the ice had been on had broken off and moved away, and I realized I had a lot to learn. The second trip out to the flow edge was out of Arctic Bay with Glenn Williams, a renewable resource officer from that small hamlet, and he introduced me to Oyukaluk and his grandson, Andrew Tuktu. Andrew's guiding skills and Glenn's great advice would be key to any success I was going to have in my work in the high Arctic. And we would have some great adventures over the next decade or decade and a half. And over the years, life on the flow edge became almost normal. Well, normal with still plenty of adventure included. But for all I was learning, I wasn't getting any narwhal pictures. Most of the time I saw whales too far away, and almost always, just when I was figuring out what I should be doing, it was too late to do it. I could see the potential, but I sure wasn't going to get it this season. After 3.5 months in the field, the film review I got was nothing usable yet. It was late summer during open water, and towards the end of our time, when John Ford, the researcher I was working with, came and got us and said, "You should come and see this." There were narwhals, they were on the surface, they were fighting, and their tusks were coming up. It turned out to be a dying female and a couple of young males with her, and other males coming in, and a fight going on underwater. We were working out of 2-man kayaks. The narwhals wouldn't tolerate any engine noise around them, and when things were quiet, I couldn't get in the water because the whales would just drift away. The only time I could get anywhere near them underwater was when the fight was actually going on. When I got in the water in the midst of the fight, you'd see the female floating on the surface and the young males fighting off group after group of bigger males coming in, wanting access to the female. Trying to get close, one of the young males came up and put his tusk aimed right at my chest. You could feel the little sonic clicks as he was trying to figure who I was. He was just there for a second. It's amazing how many bad things you can think about in that second. Then he went back on to the fight. I mean, it looked like a fight in a pool hall with everybody swinging these clubs. The animals later on, when we had them out for necropsy of the dead female, were all sliced up from tusk moves, and the female had been speared with a tusk. This fight went on for at least 7 hours. It was the basis for the whole National Geographic story on narwhals, probably the hardest story I ever did. The story also opened the door for more than a decade's work I would have with narwhals and other animals in the high Arctic. This work started in the mid-'80s. There wasn't a lot of interest in the communities to have people come in. There had been some bad experiences. They wanted to make sure that people that came in would respect them and their culture. And there wasn't that much interest really from us to go north. I think there was some surprise that I kept wanting to go back, but there were so many great stories to tell. These stories really weren't natural history stories at their core. There were stories about research, there were stories about different cultural looks at whales, and that idea that the same whale was looked at a number of different ways. All this largely depended on where you were and who you were with. The more time I spent in the Arctic looking for whales and other wildlife, the more stories I could see. My freediving and underwater photography is certainly what got me in the door at National Geographic in 1976. But most of these stories had that as a very small component, trying to tell the story with what I could do, not just underwater pictures. It was really whatever pictures, whatever it took to tell the story. We were giving lots of time, very little direction, and mainly we were explorers to go out there and find new things, take new pictures, and share them in National Geographic. And when you went and didn't find what you were looking for, didn't find what you expected, that was a good thing. The goal was to find those things you didn't expect. And with subjects like whales and the Arctic and whales in the Arctic, there was plenty of that. I had great adventures in the Arctic over a pretty long time. It was a wonderful experience, and I'll forever be grateful for the people who took care of me up there and let me be a pretty successful visitor. And of course, it wasn't just the Arctic. For those 27 years, I was visiting researchers, people working on whales and dolphins around the world, and able to work with people doing a job that they were passionate about, and it was going to get better.
After 20 years of knocking around, doing stories around the world, working with all these great people, it wasn't lost on me that the first place I worked in Hawaii with whales was a pretty nice place to work. And I had a really good set of events, largely because of my longtime agent, Larry Minden. I had a chance to sell my photo collection and had some other windfalls, so I got sort of, for the really first time, sort of financially ahead enough that I went back to Jim Darling and said, let's take some of this money, go back to Hawaii and see if it's worth going back and continuing research there, which may be one of the animals we'll really get to know with the science and with photography.
Jim Darling and I came back to Maui in 1996, and the first year it was 2 guys in a borrowed boat, thanks to Mark Robinson. The next year we were part of a BBC film, and we bought a boat that never satisfied. It wasn't new, but it was ours. And by 1999, it wasn't just 2 guys and an old boat. We also had Megan Jones who joined the operation, and in 1999, National Geographic did my second story on humpback whales, listening to humpbacks. based on new studies since our return to Maui. It became clear at that time that if we were to continue and do the things we hope to do, we needed a more straightforward nonprofit status in the United States. And so in 2001, Jim Darling, Megan Jones, and Flip Nicklin, that's me, and an old boat called Never Satisfied became Whale Trust. Our funding came from a little money from BBC when they were working with us, some support from National Geographic magazine, quite a bit of support from National Geographic's Grosvenor Council, and direct donations from Maui and far beyond. And sharing our story with the community and asking for their support was going to become a big part of Whale Trust. We came back to Maui in the mid-90s. I was still shooting film, but the cameras were much better. We had autofocus and auto exposure and automatic bracketing, so your percentage of pictures that worked out was much, much better. And there were a lot more whales. And the star of 1998 was a whale we just called the Friendly Singer. This was a great whale. The whale would go down and sing for 20 minutes or so, then come up and hang around the boat, look at the hydrophone, rub at the hydrophone. At one point had it under his pectoral, trying to drag the whole recording gear and Jim into the water. Then he'd go down to sing again for another 20 minutes, and then come back and hang around under the boat. One of the great things about this whale was that he would go down and sing for those 20 minutes in the days of film when you only had 36 exposures. So when he'd go down, I could get in the boat, change film, and sometimes even change lenses, and you get a whole different look when you switch off those ultra-wide lenses that we usually use underwater for shooting whale. But the best part of the Friendly Singer was that he was still hanging around the boat when he was joined by another whale. And this was another male. And what we've learned since then is singers are joined by other males and not by females, as often thought. But giant changes were coming to photography at the turn of the century, with digital photography, making remote photography easier, and giving a whole bunch of new tools for trying to capture images and tell the science story about whales. By 2001, we were getting used to digital photography in the form of consumer video. So we had gear on board to capture special moments, special days when we saw whales do new and exciting things. Now we just had to shoot movies and figure what to do with them. At about this time, we were introduced to a young man, Jason Sturgis, who wanted to come with us and shoot video with us. And he's been a tremendous addition to Whale Trust and now worked with us for over 20 years. I think it had been 6 weeks before we had a really good day with Jason, and he had to shoot the things he dreamed of shooting. Since then, in those 20 years, we've had many great days, and his video really adds to our ability to tell the story. Things were changing very quickly in underwater photography. I had a different system each year for the first 3 years I was shooting digital, but each one was better than the last. And now I was shooting still photography, and with Jason shooting video, and with the cameras getting better and better, photography became a more important tool to tell the story of whales and whale research with Whale Trust. In the early days, you're sort of dependent on photographers and filmmakers coming along for relatively short periods to try and tell a story of whales that hopefully included the work the research was doing. The new tools, the new cameras, both still cameras and video cameras, allow researchers to tell their own story. And that's a big, big difference. And as the science of whales became better and better equipped, so did digital photography. That first camera was 6 megapixels. My most recent camera is over 45 megapixels. That first camera, you could only shoot 4 pictures before you had to stop. Now it's more than 50. It was great that we had new tools, because there were new stories to tell. Megan Jones brought to Whale Trust a study of female role on the breeding grounds, starting with the role of long diving females and the question, what are they doing down there? This led to the story in National Geographic magazine in 2007 titled, appropriately, What Are They Doing Down There? My role at Whale Trust is documenting behavioral research on humpback whales. It'll be my 27th year starting in January. Sharing what we learn in scientific publications and popular publications, sharing with film crews as they come through, and getting the word out in ways that I really didn't imagine until I came to work at Whale Trust. In 2006, we started Whale Tales, a weekend in Kapalua where we would share research we were doing and others were doing in Maui and beyond, and asking for public support. This has continued even during the pandemic with a virtual version that we've done for the last 2 years, but this year we'll be live again, back to doing Whale Tales in Kapalua at the Ritz-Carlton. And in the 20 months I was at home in Alaska during the pandemic, I started telling stories through Whale Trust called Humpback Chronicles, stories and adventures around whale research. And of course, photography is a big part of all of these efforts, and not just mine. We have a new member of our group, Ralph Pace, who's working with us and has for 7 years now. Ralph is a tremendous photographer. Ralph and his family live right here in Monterey. And she's really not new to us. She's been working with us since she was a kid, but Haley Robb Spears, now a graduate student at UC Santa Cruz, adds to the scientific component and also takes some really interesting pictures along the way with the GoPro on a pole. From here, I head back to Maui. We'll be working once again with Jim and Megan. I'll go out on the boat most days with Jason and Haley and Ralph. And on the documentary boat, on the good days, we'll still be swimming with whales and telling their stories.
We missed the 21 season because of the pandemic, but we were back this year. And we didn't know it, but bubbles were going to be a big part of this year. And on January 28th, we had this little calf that wouldn't go back to mom when she went down. She just swam around the boat and for some reason blew bubbles over and over again. And it was just a happy whale picture and a great way to be back in Hawaii. And it turns out there's a scientific publication about bubble blowing this month coming out. And what we've been seeing for 20 years, but finally got enough to do a peer-reviewed publication on it, is that male humpback whales give bubble baths to female humpback whales. We call it unofficially the California jacuzzi move, but it's out as a scientific publication this year. And that idea that when you come in, however you're drawn into the narrative of whales, there are a couple things I should say. In 1980, I sent a proposal to do whales to National Geographic and was told, no, we've done whales. That was 18 whale stories ago. And at the same time, 2 years ago, someone asked Jim Darling at a conference, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do we know about humpback whales? And without a moment's blinking time, he said, oh, way less than 1. This isn't the end of the story. This is the beginning of the story. And I'll tell you right now that all the things you know about whales are just not even beginning to see all the cool things that they do, and you're 5 years behind stuff that's going to come out. That's all makes whales, especially humpback whales, a really different animal. And in 1963, after they'd filmed the whale and photographed the whale and sat on the back of the whale, my father dove down to take the line off the tail of the whale. And I asked him if he still remembered and what he thought about that.
On the last dive, when we cut the whale free, it was just I think the whale was as excited as I was. And the whale could swim away, and we just on the surface and saw him dive, and then all of a sudden he came to the surface and spouted and was going away, and I felt we did something good.
Thanks, Dad. Sorry, he's watching. Thank you. I really want to thank I can't thank all the people I should, but National Geographic invented me and gave me so much freedom to be what I became. Whale Trust is a great place to end up where I am today, and I'm a really happy camper. Lindblad Expeditions for being my sponsor and for getting me around all kinds of cool places and traveling with my wife when I was doing it. And Optic West and B&H for having me here today, and all of you. Thank you very, very much.